What's the population of Switzerland?
About 8.9 million people in 2025.
How many people die in Switzerland every day?
Roughly 200 on average.
And how many people are impacted by a death usually?
It's hard to say exactly, but usually somewhere between 5 and 10 people are deeply affected. Close family, friends, sometimes co-workers or neighbors.
So, based on that, what are the chances I might run into someone who's grieving, like, say, in Zurich?
Honestly, pretty high. If you think about it, 200 people pass away every day, and each one leaves behind several people grieving. That adds up quickly. And grief doesn't just last a day, it can last for months, even years. Plus, Zurich isn't just made up of locals. People are constantly coming in from nearby towns, other cities, even other countries. So it's very likely that on any given day, if you walk through Zurich, sit in a cafe, or ride the tram, you might meet someone who's quietly carrying some form of grief.
And since when I know this, every time I'm on a tram, I think that maybe someone around me is mourning. And with that in mind, you go through the world with more kindness.
Oh, that's well said.
Yeah,
So what do we say then? Like,
let's be kind.
let's be kind.
Hi, I'm Viola.
Hi, I'm Derya, and this is Final Thoughts.
A conversation between friends about death.
So today we're exploring death in Switzerland, the place where we met.
Exactly.
Before we start, I'm really wondering, how did you feel while you were doing your research? Because we did that separately.
Mm, so I would say that I felt in two different ways. So I started with a feeling of friction that comes from a childhood memory that I will explain in a bit. And then this feeling of friction turned into curiosity and just being interested in what I was reading in the second part.
But what was the childhood memory? Now I'm curious.
So, when I was around 10 years old, one of my classmates died in a car accident. So, it was a very sudden death. And the day before, during one lesson, we were listening to some songs. And one of these songs, he said that it sounded like a funeral song. So, since that episode, I have this correlation of if you talk about death the day before, the day after you die, which is a very silly thing, but it comes from this from childhood, and it creates this friction. So that's why I felt this. Oh my God, I'm reading things about death. I might die tomorrow, and yeah, that's the story.
Yeah, it's crazy what memory do with us.
Yeah. What about you? How did you feel?
So I started to Google death in Switzerland, funerals in Switzerland, how to die, how to do a funeral, and I felt very much judged by Google. So I thought Google must think, my God, someone call 911, which will not work in Switzerland. But it was this kind of feeling a bit judged to explore a topic that is not spoken about so much. And then I was reading a couple of hours about the topic, and I really felt some sort of like, I felt a bit down and a little bit of sadness. So I needed to take a break and just to decouple from the topic. And when I came back to it, it really turned into curiosity. And I would even say to this point, beauty, to see beauty in this topic, which I loved. So I can't wait that we explore this. Let's start.
Yes. Few months ago, I was walking in a forest outside of Zurich. A normal forest, just imagine trees, this nice path in the middle, everything green, very nice. And I saw a little sign, I read it, and I realized I was walking in a cemetery.
Oh, wow, never heard of this.
Yeah, and then I got curious. I went home and I Googled it, I did some research, and I discovered that it's quite a thing in Switzerland. For example, one of the biggest organization that does this forest burial has almost 85 cemeteries around the entire country, which
Wow.
is quite a lot, and there are other organizations doing it. And so how does it work? Basically, when someone dies, the family chooses a tree, and then the ashes, which usually are put in a biodegradable urn, they are put in the roots of the trees. And then most of the people don't put anything on the trees, they just leave the place as it is. And some they might put some little signs, but if you don't know it, you would never realize. It's just
But it's just like a public space. You can just walk into it.
it's just a
You don't
normal
know.
forest.
Wow, that's amazing.
You walk, you are in a normal forest, because it's just a little part of the forest, and the rest is not a cemetery. It's just this small section, but you don't realize it's a cemetery.
I've never heard of it. It's quite interesting. Never heard from anybody at all. And then you just like walk into a forest and it turns out to be a cemetery.
Yeah, and it's quite special also because if you think about it, in nature there's a lot of death. Like flowers, they die, plants, they die, leaves, they just die. So animals, wild animals, so there's a lot of death. And I find it very nice and special, the idea of choosing to be buried in a forest where death is already so much present.
Absolutely. So in the end, it seems like actually the right and perfect place to be buried.
Yes. Yeah. So I was talking about ashes before because the person has to be cremated to go in the roots of the tree. And then I did a small research about cremation in Switzerland, and actually is one of the countries with the highest cremation rate in Europe. Depending on the website where you look, let's say it's around 80-85%. And just to give a correlation, in US it's 60%, in China is around 50%, in Japan is super high, is one of the countries with the highest one, is 99%, and Greece is one of the lowest one, it's around 1-3%. But Switzerland is definitely in Europe one of the highest one. And then I was wondering why cremation is so big in Switzerland. And I would say it's for three main reasons. First is secularization. If you look at the religious landscape in Switzerland, we have the main group, 35% is non religious. Then we have Catholicism, 30%. Then we have Protestantism, Judaism, Islam, and other religions. So that's the main reason, the secularization. Then it's also perceived as more environmental friendly.
Yeah. Is it really?
It's debatable. Of course, cremation uses less land, which it's good compared to normal burial. There are no chemicals related to embalming in cremation, which is also good because they don't go in the soil. But there are definitely greener choices, like coffin that is biodegradable or human composting. So there is some debate going on if this is really an environmental friendly approach. And then another reason why cremation is so big is the legal flexibility, because in Switzerland you are allowed to scatter ashes more or less wherever you want.
Actually, I read a lot about it, and it's referred to as freedom of the ashes, and it basically says it's really in our legislation, and it says you can do whatever you like with your ashes if it is in line with like the forest and water protection, aviation, building, environmental law has to be complied with as well, and it shouldn't be like recognizable or seen after you spread the ashes. So it's especially when it comes to public waters that are quite popular with people. Municipalities can restrict or prohibit some of this spreading outside of cemeteries. For instance, if we would die, we cannot just say, please fly my ashes over the Aletsch Glacier. So this kind of things still has to be like checked. And I think this is very, like, you can see the Swissness in this part where we have a lot of freedom to do certain things, but it's within rules. I don't know, would you agree with that?
Yeah, totally. I can totally see the Swissness in freedom with rules.
Absolutely. And of course, like other than that, as I said, we can do whatever we want. And I realize people do get super creative with what to do with their ashes. So I heard this in the podcast of Leah Shepherd's. She did a podcast for her bachelor thesis about cremation and what to do with the ashes in Switzerland. One of my friends forwarded to me. I can really recommend. It's in German. But there was a man about like middle age, and he has this idea of putting his ashes in a 1st August rocket. For everybody that doesn't know, 1st August is the Swiss National Day. And he would like his friends to make a celebration, come together, and when the rocket, and with the rocket, his ashes is blown into the sky, it will create this kind of twinkling stars, and it will be some sort of a like last portrait of himself. And I find it somehow quite cute and nice. Let's see if he will do, and if he's allowed to do it.
Yeah.
What did you find out? What do people do with their ashes?
So one thing that you can do in Switzerland with your ashes, also in other parts of the world, but definitely in Switzerland you can do, and I think it fits very well. You can turn your ashes into diamonds.
Is this really like a real diamond? It's a real diamond.
It's actually like it is, because from physical and chemical perspective, it's exactly as a diamond grown in nature. And just to understand a bit more, because I didn't know, so I did a bit of research. Basically, very deep in the planet, in the soil, in the earth, where there is a lot of heat and pressure, the carbon, basically, after many millions of years, it turns into diamonds. And it's basically the same process with the ashes. So the ashes have inside carbon, and so then with a lot of heat and pressure, it can turn into diamonds.
Oh, wow.
And one interesting thing is that the human body also has inside boron, which makes the diamonds often blue. So if you see a blue diamond,
yeah,
it might be a human body.
Wow, that's amazing. But how much of ashes do you need to make a diamond?
Yes. So an adult, on average, an adult person produces, like when they are burnt, they are more or less 4 kilograms of ashes. And to make a diamond, you need more or less 250 grams. So you can do quite some diamonds for the family. I was talking with some people about this podcast, this project that we're doing about death. And one guy asked me if we can talk about the practicalities of death, because he had no idea of what to do when someone dies. And I realized I also don't know what to do. So I went we live in Zurich. I went to the website of the Zurich city, and it's mind blowing what you can find. Everything is super well explained. You can even plan your own funeral in advance. There's a very guided step by step process where you can choose your coffin, you can choose if you want clothes, which type of clothes, you can choose the flowers. It's really it's really amazing. It's so I found it very Swiss because it's so well guided, you can't get lost.
I mean, I think it's a very good point to talk about the practicalities, definitely, because I also checked the website of the city of Zurich. So true. It's done so well. So whoever did that, very well done. And yeah, I mean, I'm also wondering what to do when someone dies. So if someone dies at home, you have to contact a doctor that can confirm the death and issue the so-called original death certificate. If someone dies in a hospital, they take care of this whole process. It's the same, but they do it. And if someone is dying through suicide, accident, or murder, you have to call the police. And when I was reading about murders, it actually made me realize that what I usually see in movies or read in books is very much real.
Oh yeah, totally.
I found two other very interesting things on the website of Zurich about death. And one is close to the cemetery at Silfeld Cemetery. There's this museum about life and death, and currently they have this exhibition about mourning, but they have also events just about the topic
Wow.
in the cemetery. And the second thing that I really liked is the concept of forget me not. You know, it's to commemorate people that are not buried in the cemetery or where whose grave has been removed from the cemetery. That you have a space, little space, where you can put pictures and just memories to remember this person. And why did I say remove the grave? Because maybe that's not the case in all countries. So in Switzerland, after a certain time, which is usually 20 to 25 years, this is this kind of the resting time of a grave. They have to remove the tombs, and the city of Zurich just offers that for free so that you can still have a space if you have no grave left.
That's very nice. But it makes me wonder if we really need a place to commemorate someone. Because if I think about myself, um, my grandma died, and every time I eat polpette, and polpette for the non-Italian speakers are like meatballs, but in this case is bread balls. It's not with meat, it's just with bread. And every time I eat these polpette, I think about my grandma. So I don't need a place where to go. I understand that there might be people who need it, but I was just wondering, do we really need it?
I mean, I think there's a lot of ways of commemorate people, absolutely. And I think for me, when I visit a cemetery, it really makes me feel like I'm somehow I join the death and I visit them. And also, I think this kind of fear of forgetting people that you lost, it can just be a bit helpful to have a space. But in the end, I think everybody is individual, and we might have just different ways of remembering people.
Yeah, and that's also nice.
Yes. I mean, coming back to the practicalities, us talking about that in the context of death might seem very formal or a bit cold, but I think it's quite the contrary, because just think about, you know, when you're in a situation where you witnessed or witness someone dying, it can be a very overwhelming thing. And I think especially also scary because you don't really know what's happening when you don't work in this area. But there are people that deal with death every day, like in palliative care, crematoriums, funeral offices, and they are the ones that keep a cold head and they can support you. And I think just knowing that, knowing this kind of information, can just take away some of your fear.
Quick heads up, we forgot to intro the upcoming Did You Know segment. So, if you're watching on YouTube, this voiceover is playing over a random moment where we realize we're both wearing red socks. Enjoy the Did You Knows.
Did you know that the Eiger and the Matterhorn, two of the most famous Swiss mountains, are two of the deadliest peaks in Europe and in the world?
Did you know that you can be cremated naked, but most of the people do it in their own clothes?
Did you know that in Switzerland assisted suicide is legal? And unlike other countries that allow it, Switzerland does not require the person to be a resident. And by the way, this big topic will be covered in a different episode.
Did you know that Swiss people are generally very private? And when it comes to death, many people would say death takes place behind closed doors in Switzerland.
Did you know that many famous people are buried in Switzerland? Charlie Chaplin, James Joyce, Audrey Hepburn, Coco Chanel, Hermann Hesse, Paul Klee, Patricia Highsmith, just to mention some.
Did you know about the Lonely Burial? It's a project initiated by Melanie Katz where poets compose poems for those who died alone and read it at their funeral. We will now read a poem, first in the original language, German, and then in English.
Right, so this poem was written for a Mr. A.B. There are no names, just the initials. He was born on the 20th of April 1934 and he died on the 16th of March 2024 in Zurich. The poem was written by Natalie Schmidt. Für eine Weile. Da hing ein Kittel noch eine Weile auf dem Balkon, über den kaputten Kühlschrank ohne Strom. Hat sich im Wind bewegt und manchmal etwas aufgebläht, mit dem Ahorn zwischen Haus und Garten. Wie lange müssen Äpfel im Keller liegen, bevor ihr Duft hoch und unter die Wohnungstüren zieht? Kurzzeitig schlich der Kittel sich in einen Traum, knarrte im Holzbalken und lächelte zufrieden, bis er von der Wäscheleine fiel und aus dem Keller die Äpfel verschwanden und ein Wind durch die Bäume ging, als würde er tanzen. Time for the English version.
Yes. For a while. There was a smoke hanging for a while on the balcony, above the broken refrigerator without electricity. It moved in the wind and sometimes puffed up a bit with the maple tree between the house and the garden. How long do apples have to lie in the cellar before their scent wafts up and under the apartment doors? For a moment, the smoke crept into a dream, creaked in the wooden beams, and smiled contentedly until it fell from the clothesline, and the apples disappeared from the cellar, and a wind blew through the trees as if it were dancing. Ba-bum!